Hello, everybody. Good day to all of you. I sat down yesterday and told myself that I was going to read some 19th century poetry today. But I discovered, although there are some really nice poems I liked, it was hard to find enough poems that were short uh, and short enough for this program. Apparently, the poetry readers of the 19th century had a lot of servants to do their work, and they had plenty of time to read long poems. And of course, they didn't have the internet, they didn't have TV, and they couldn't even go down to the afternoon cinema. So poetry and art were what they had left. That's not all bad. But in any case, I got sidetracked with Billy Collins's book, Poetry 180, which is an anthology of modern poems, and I think many of you would find them delightful or odd, as the case may be. And we're going to sort of specialize in oddities this morning, starting with one by David Clewell called Vegetarian Physics. The tofu that's shown up overnight in this house is frightening proof of the law of conservation. Matter that simply cannot be created or destroyed. Matter older than Newton, who knew better than to taste it. Older than Lao Tzu, who thought about it, but finally chose harmonious non-interference. I'd like to be philosophical too, see it as some kind of pale, inscrutable wisdom among the hot dogs, the cold chicken, the leftover deviled eggs, but I'm talking curdled soybean milk. And I don't have that kind of energy. I'd rather not be part of the precariously metaphorical wedding of modern physics and the ancient Eastern mysteries. But still, whoever stashed the tofu in my Frigidaire had better come back for it soon. I'm not Einstein, but I'm smart enough to know a bad idea when I see it taking up space, biding its time, like so much that demands our imperfect attention amid the particle roar of the world, going nowhere fast. I got a big kick out of that poem, and I hope among my vegetarian friends I haven't offended anybody, but I have to say that I agree with Clewell, the author. I'm not a big fan of tofu. When I told my daughter that, and especially my granddaughter, their chins raised and their eyebrows raised, and they looked at me like, well, Granddad, you're over the hill. I already know that, so that really didn't offend me. Okay, we're going to move on to another oddity, and we're not going to be talking about food oddities like tofu here, but this is a poem by Lucille Clifton called Praise Song. To my Aunt Blanche, who rolled from grass to driveway into the street one Sunday morning, I was 10. I had never seen a human woman hurl her basketball of a body into the traffic of the world. Praise to the drivers who stopped in time. Praise to the faith with which she rose after some moments, then slowly walked sighing back to her family. Praise to the arms which understood little or nothing of what it meant, but welcomed her in without judgment, accepting it all like children might, like God. I think we'd have to call that an oddity. But think about it for a minute. When you're hearing this poem, you're thinking, oh my God, it's going to be a poem about this poor suicidal woman that rolls herself into the street and is crushed and mangled by trucks or automobiles. But it doesn't happen. Instead, good things happen. And I think we're left to understand that perhaps it was also good for Aunt Blanche, as well as for the rest of the family. Okay. There is a slightly longer poem that is really odd that I've come up with next. And it's a little Kafkaesque, as you'll soon see. And it's called My Life. The epigram of this poem is, quote, after Henri Michaud, end quote. And it could have said, inspired by Henri Michaud. The author of the poem is actually Joe Wenderoth, who is a professor of English at a small school. I don't even remember where. But he's a collectible poet, obviously. I'll tell you a little bit more about Henri Michaud after we read the poem. And remember that Henri Michaud inspired this poem. Okay, the name again is My Life. Somehow it got into my room. I found it, and it was naturally trapped. It was nothing more than a frightened animal. Since then, I raised it up. I kept it for myself, kept it in my room, kept it for its own good. I named the animal My Life. I found food for it and fed it with my bare hands. I let it into my bed, let it breathe in my sleep, and the animal in my love, my constant care, grew up to be strong and capable of many clever tricks. One day, quite recently, I was running my hand over the animal's side, and I came to understand that it could very easily kill me. I realized further that it would kill me. This is why it exists, why I raised it. Since then, I have not known what to do. I stopped feeding it, only to find that its growth has nothing to do with food. I stopped cleaning it, and I found that it cleans itself. I stopped singing it to sleep and found that it falls asleep faster without my song. I don't know what to do. I no longer make my life do tricks. I leave the animal alone, and for now, it leaves me alone too. I have nothing to say, nothing to do. Between my life and me, a silence is coming. Together, we will not get through this. That's a little scary, isn't it, on the surface? But this is a poem that's loaded with metaphor, isn't it? But let me tell you a little bit about Henri Michaud. And after reading the poem, I wanted to know a little more about him, so I found a detailed biography in the Poetry Magazine archives. He died at age 89 back in the 1980s after a lifetime of writing poetry and also painting and drawing. Some of his stuff, especially his art, was done under the influence of mescaline, a derivative of mescal. Some of you know it was a sort of early version of LSD. We can only be wondering a little bit about that, and I think we can say that Michaud can only be described as an oddity himself. He wanted to be a priest, but his father talked him out of it and said he would pay for him to go to medical school. So he went to medical school, but then that didn't last long. As a former medical student myself, I can understand why he might have become disillusioned. And so what he decided to do was travel. And he sent out on voyages as a sailor on various transport vessels. And then he spent a lot of time in Asia. I'm not sure how he escaped the rigors of World War II, but he had strange visions. And one of those strange visions was what inspired this poem. And for those of you who are familiar with the famous story by Franz Kafka called Metamorphosis, this poem is a lot like that. It's a metaphor for a strange life. Is it Michaud's life? Or is it Wenderoth, the writer's life? Or is it the life of all of us? All of those possibilities can be true at the same time, can't they? I urge you to get a copy of this book. It's loaded with great poetry. And next week we'll have something completely different, I promise you. Until then, read some poetry or even write some. I know some of you are perfectly capable of doing it, so get with it. See you next weekend. That's it for now. Bye.